Hey everyone, I'm Angie Mar. You are watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
He really wants to lay out for people the steps we're taking to build on what we did over the summer. More requirements for federal workers, more requirements for private sector employees as well.
President Biden's new strategy to battle the Delta variant, ramping up pressure on the unvaccinated and calling for more vaccine mandates. What else is in his 6-point plan?
Today, after a careful assessment of the facts and the law, the Justice Department has filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas.
Battling Texas's new abortion law, the Justice Department suing the state to protect women's constitutional rights.
I think that women are so strong, and I really feel that women are going to be the ones who bring the economy back, and there's no doubt in my mind.
Don't call it a comeback. She's been here for years. New York City chef Angie Mar talking about reviving the city's fine dining scene, anti-Asian hate, and how women are leading our economic recovery. We start today with President Biden's new 6-point plan to tackle the raging Delta virus. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba is on the North Lawn for us. Monica, we know the president plans to announce a vaccine mandate for all federal workers. What else is part of this new strategy to try to get COVID under control?
This is really significant, Allison, because it is going to apply to the federal workforce in addition to millions of government contractors. Essentially, anybody who does work with the U.S. government will be subject to this, and the same standard will apply, which will be you have to either get vaccinated in the next 75 days or so or face disciplinary action and potentially lose your job. So the president is really upping the stakes here. We knew that he wanted these federal workers and contractors to get vaccinated, but now he's taking it a step further. And beyond that, we're also getting brand new details about the federal government asking through the Department of Labor any company, private or otherwise, that has more than 100 employees is also going to have their employees either be vaccinated or submit to weekly testing. That's really significant because if we take those two things combined with another new regulation the president is going to announce today, which is that all of the 17 million healthcare workers at different hospitals, dialysis centers, anything like that, they all have to be vaccinated as well under this new rule. That's going to apply to about 100 million workers in this country. So about 2/3 total of the workforce of anybody in this country who has a job. That's very significant, the White House believes, because they can get more of the 80 million people who are unvaccinated vaccinated throughout these more aggressive measures. So the president is going to be detailing that at the top. In addition, he's going to be talking about the need for booster shots, which we know will become available to anybody who got the Pfizer vaccine in the coming weeks, followed by Moderna and J&J, we expect. Then he's also going to be talking about his plans for schools and finally making testing a little bit more affordable and available, since that's something we've really seen diminish and gone down over the last few months. As it seemed COVID cases were getting better, testing resources really were diverted to other things. Now the federal government is going to say we need to bring those back, particularly because of the concern over the Delta variant, Allison.
Monica, let's talk more about schools. You mentioned the administration wants regular testing in schools. What's the plan there? How are they going to make this happen? Because it is certainly a large task at hand.
And this is a place where the federal government really can't exercise as much power as over employees and the federal workforce as we just discussed. So instead, this is a place where the president is going to be applying political pressure to local leaders, so governors, to essentially make it mandatory in their states to have all teachers and staff be vaccinated, or to ensure more regular testing for students, because as we know, anybody under the age of 12 who's in the classroom right now, they can't be vaccinated because they're not eligible to get the shots. So the president is going to make the point that those young people are so vulnerable, as we've now seen these record numbers of kids with COVID just now and hospitalizations alarming so many people, that this is why the president is going to make this particular push at the school level. But at the same time, it's more of an urging, it's a calling on, it's not necessarily a requirement because he can't. The only places where he is going to say today that he would like all teachers to be vaccinated because he has purview over that is things like Head Start programs or Department of Defense schools. So you'll hear the president talk about that a little bit. But again, he's going to stress that testing has to be a more important component. And there's already been something like $10 billion allocated to HHS that's supposed to go towards some of this testing, but they haven't seen enough of it being used. So they're going to call on more school districts to really use that money in order to get this surveillance, because if you're testing kids every once in a while, you may not be able to catch asymptomatic cases that then really spread like wildfire in these small classrooms or in cafeterias where kids are eating without masks, even if they're wearing face coverings during their classes, Allison.
Monica, let's talk about the president's approval rating, on COVID. We know it took a dip over the summer with COVID cases spiking across the country. If the administration can't get a handle on this surge, how does this affect his other priorities, infrastructural, social spending, voting rights? These are all important things, but you can't really get into all of that while we have a pandemic still raging.
Most definitely, and the White House will be the first to tell you all of these issues are inextricably intertwined, and that is exactly the challenge and the reason the president is going to make for wanting to implement some of these tougher steps toward battling, in particular, the Delta variant, but the COVID-19 pandemic overall. He's going to argue that that's why we saw some of those lackluster jobs numbers on Friday from the August report. He's going to say that essentially we can't get the country back on track until we get this pandemic under control. But I have to tell you, Allison, it's a far cry from where we were just 2 months ago on the 4th of July when the president wanted to declare independence from the virus. That's not at all what the message is going to be today. It's going to be a far tougher one. He's going to say, listening to the science and data, that people really need to hunker down and be careful, that we have the tools, but now they need to be implemented further.
All right, Monica Alba, the White House, thank you so much. Tropical depression Mindy drenching parts of the South today, but good news, it is weakening after making landfall in Florida. The system now tracking away from the coast. The Northeast and New England also dealing with more rain today. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren's in Manville, New Jersey.
Hey, Allison, this is an area that has just been on eggshells as this next storm system is moved through. You can see the damage still left behind from Ida. Now they've been bracing to see what would happen next, as so many are still looking for help.
Tropical storm Mindy making landfall near the Florida Panhandle. Heavy rain and high winds creating rough surf, blowing this semi-truck off the road near Tallahassee. The storm's impact sweeping throughout the South, expected to bring possibly up to 6 inches of rain in some areas. Meanwhile, the devastating toll of Ida continues to be felt across the Northeast. New York City tapping into a new alert system for the latest storm. Mayor Bill de Blasio detailing the climate-driven rain response plan in light of Ida's aftermath.
And what we're going to be doing from now on is giving people information with a sense that we know how rapidly weather is changing now, like nothing we've ever seen before.
Residents in the hardest hit areas worried what the new weather will bring.
We're seeing this as a flood zone. I'm ready to go. I don't want to be in it again.
There's not a lot we could do to prepare for it. We could just pray that it's just going to be a rainstorm and that's it. There's not a lot to lose.
Leaders in New Jersey pushing for more federal aid.
In this small town, this is the 4th major storm that has devastated our town in 25 years. Our community needs help. We're not the only one, but we need help.
In the South, Hurricane Ida's devastation still growing.
I don't really have any words to say. It's just very heartbreaking. I don't know what we're going to do from here.
More than 80 have now died. Louisiana reporting 11 additional storm-related deaths from Ida. The lights are back on for some in the Bayou State. But more than 10 days after Ida made landfall, hundreds of thousands remain without power.
But we'll make it. We'll get through it. I don't mean to cry. But it's hard. It's a lot.
Some people here breathing a sigh of relief as there wasn't any devastating flash floods associated with this storm, but the rain certainly not helping with the cleanup. You can see house after house on this street with huge piles, all their worldly possessions out on the street, and some people worried they may never get back into these homes.
The act is clearly unconstitutional under long-standing Supreme Court precedent. In the words of Planned Parenthood versus Casey, that, quote, regardless of whether exceptions are made for particular circumstances, a state may not prohibit any woman from making the ultimate decision to terminate her pregnancy before viability.
The Justice Department suing the state of Texas, challenging its new ban on most abortions. Last week, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to block the law, now the toughest in the country. Let's get right to NBC News Justice correspondent Pete Williams. Pete, the AG there calling the statute clearly unconstitutional. What else does this lawsuit say?
Well, it says it's unconstitutional for three reasons. Number one, that it deprives women of the right to seek an abortion. They say that's been guaranteed by the Supreme Court as a constitutional right. Secondly, they say it deprives or attempts to deprive the federal government of the ability to enforce that right. And thirdly, they say it would interfere with the ability of federal agencies to deliver abortions as part of their health care programs. So for all those reasons, they say it's unconstitutional and that the federal government has the legal standing to bring this challenge.
Pete, Attorney General Garland describing the state as serving as bounty hunters authorized to collect at least $10,000 per claim for individuals who break the law. What kind of precedent, what kind of message is the Justice Department sending to other states considering anti-abortion laws?
Don't try this at home is basically what
Yeah.
the Justice Department is trying to say here. They're very concerned that about two things. Number one, that other states would try to copy what the Texas law has done here. And of course, remember, this Texas law is engineered to make it harder to prevail in court. This lawsuit is by no means a slam dunk here. So they don't want other states to try it in the abortion context. But the Attorney General said today he's worried that other states could try this in other contexts, that they could say anybody can sue any official who tries to enforce gun laws or something like that. So they're very concerned that this model of saying, well, the state's not doing anything, but we're allowing other people to file lawsuits if they don't like it, that's not a model that they want to see catch on. They're trying to nip this in the bud.
Pete, I also want to talk to you about the Supreme Court blocking the execution of a Texas man on death row last night, just hours before he was supposed to be put to death. John Henry Ramirez asked for a pastor to pray with him in the death chamber, but the state didn't allow it. Can you walk us through what the Supreme Court said here?
Yes, in fact, it was 3 hours before he was scheduled to be put to death that the Supreme Court blocked this execution. Ramirez had argued that the state of Texas violated his constitutional rights by refusing to let his pastor into the execution chamber so they could pray out loud together and so that the pastor could lay hands on him. The court late last night blocked the execution and said it would take up this constitutional claim in October or November. So Ramirez was convicted of fatally stabbing a convenience store clerk in a 2004 robbery after a drug binge, and other death row inmates have challenged these restrictions on participation by religious figure. The question here is whether that violates the guarantee of religious freedom. In the past, the court has blocked other executions when such people have been barred from the process.
Pete, one more for you on the Supreme Court. For the first time since the pandemic started, the High Court will hear in-person arguments this fall. They've been arguing cases over the phone to date. What will the courtroom look like when they go back? What do we know?
Right. So this will be when the court's new term begins the first Monday in October. The justices will be on the bench, and they have not met together in the courtroom since the pandemic shut down the court building in March of 2020. And they've been hearing oral argument by telephone conference call for all of the past term and the last part of the term before that. Now, it's not going to be a total return to normal. Admission to the courtroom will be limited to just the justices, essential court staff, the lawyers arguing the cases, and the journalists who cover the court full time. So that means most of the seats in the courtroom will be empty. The public can't get in, neither can the other lawyers who would sit in the bar section. And the resumption of oral argument will be different in one other respect. The court will provide a live audio feed of the arguments. Live audio was made available when they were hearing argument by conference call, but in the past, when the justices were in the courtroom, we didn't get audio recordings until a couple of days later.
All right, so the audio recordings coming sooner than ever before. Pete, you are, as always, a wealth of knowledge. Thank you so very much.
Okay, you bet.
Today, we are proposing investments to provide universal paid leave and to guarantee access to affordable, quality child care, changes that will benefit employers and workers alike.
The House Ways and Means Committee marking up the Democrats' $3.5 trillion social spending package as lawmakers argue over the price tag. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell here. Now, Leanne, I feel like I haven't seen you in forever. It's wonderful to see your face.
Just thinking the exact same thing, Allison. Great to be here.
Wonderful to see you. So tell us, it's kind of funny because we haven't seen you in a bit, but not a lot has changed. They're still arguing over the numbers here. What are you hearing from your sources about the latest on the price tag here and the negotiations going on behind the scenes?
Hey, Allison. Well, that's right. $3.5 trillion is what most Democrats want to spend on this human infrastructure bill. But then there are people like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia who say that $3.5 trillion is a non-starter for him. He said as far back as June that he's up to $1 to maybe $2 trillion as long as it's fully paid for. Now, that's creating a lot of tension between the moderates and the progressive wing of the party who say $3.5 trillion was already a compromise. One progressive member, Representative Rashida Tlaib, tweeted last night that $3.5 trillion is the floor. Well, that's actually not the case. The most they can spend, because that is what has been written in the rules, is $3.5 trillion. But it does show the conflict between the two factions of the party. Now, my sources are telling me that there is widespread acknowledgement that the number is going to have to be less than $3.5 trillion because they are going to need every single Democrat in the Senate for this to pass, including Senator Joe Manchin. So he has a lot of power here, Allison.
Leanne, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is asking the Supreme Court to overturn the proxy voting rules put in place during the pandemic. It basically lets lawmakers vote remotely. What's going on here?
That's right. That's something that Leader McCarthy has been complaining about for an extremely long time. Speaker Pelosi has extended proxy voting to January 1st. So now he's asked the Supreme Court to look into this. Well, the lower courts have said that they aren't going to get involved in this. Despite that, Leader McCarthy is wanting the Supreme Court to engage. Well, Democratic leadership aides are putting out numbers that say that it's not just Democrats who are voting by proxy during this pandemic, that many Republicans have taken advantage of this as well. And so this is going to be an issue for the Supreme Court. It seems not likely that they're going to get involved in this, that this is an issue just for the House to resolve. But we'll see how this lands, Allison.
Leanne, I also have to ask you about some changes we're going to see around the Capitol. Capitol Police are bringing back some of the fencing there ahead of a Justice for J6 rally on September 18th, J6 meaning January 6th. What else are they doing to beef up security?
That's right. Well, the Capitol Police officers, no one is allowed to take leave right now. Every man and woman has to be on deck and working on that day. There's also going to be some security briefings by the new chief of police, Tom Manger, who's going to brief leaders of both parties in both the House and the Senate. So they are taking this extremely seriously, especially considering what happened on January 6th. They don't want to repeat of that, and they also want to show that they are prepared to handle whatever situation and challenge comes before them, Allison.
Yeah, definitely a top priority to protect the Capitol and Congress, of course, and all of you who live and work in that area. Leanne, some sad news today, but glad to hear that at least it sounds like she's doing okay. Senator Amy Klobuchar sharing she was diagnosed with breast cancer and treated earlier this year. How's she doing?
Yeah, she said that it was detected in February. She went through a lumpectomy, and that her prognosis now looks extremely good, that her treatment has gone extremely well. Well, she talked about it on Good Morning America on ABC this morning. She not only talked about herself, but had some very prudent advice for women everywhere. Let's listen.
Thousands of women have undetected breast cancer. 1 in 3 Americans have put off going to any kind of routine examination or procedure. And so doctors over and over are telling me that they're seeing people with much bigger problems than if they'd gone in early. So that's my first practical advice. Get those screenings, go in, get a mammogram, get whatever health checkup that you should normally be getting.
So excellent advice from Senator Klobuchar, but her health is well, and she is doing quite well, Allison.
Leanne, an important reminder for all women to make those appointments. I know I just made one in a couple of weeks. You just don't want to stop doing those things because of COVID and find out that you waited too long. Really important stuff. Thank you so much. All right, let's go to NBC News Digital reporter Maya Eagling. She's got the latest headlines from NBCNews.com. Hey, Maya.
Hey, Allison, let's start in San Diego with a federal grand jury indicting a California father in the stabbing deaths of his 2 young children. Matthew Taylor Coleman confessed to killing his son, 10-month-old and 2-year-old, while in Mexico this summer after saying he was influenced by QAnon. The 40-year-old father is charged with 2 counts of foreign first-degree murder of U.S. nationals and could face the death penalty. Officials in Richmond, Virginia are planning to replace a time capsule dating back to 1887. It was buried in the now removed base of the statue of Confederate General Robert E. Lee. Historical records and imaging tests help locate the capsule, which is believed to contain a U.S. silver dollar and a collection of Confederate buttons. That capsule is being taken out today, and there are plans to replace it with a new capsule reflecting current times, including an expired Pfizer vaccine vial and a Black Lives Matter sticker. Moderna is developing a single-dose vaccine that combines a booster dose of the COVID-19 shot with the seasonal flu shot. The company's CEO says it plans to customize and upgrade the shot annually. The FDA is currently reviewing Moderna's 2-dose COVID-19 vaccine for kids 6 to 12 years old. Meanwhile, Novavax announced Wednesday it's also testing a combination COVID-flu vaccine. The Taliban accused of beating 2 Afghan journalists covering protests in Kabul earlier this week. After being detained, one of those reporters said they were beaten with batons, electrical cables, and whips before being released. A Taliban official says the attacks will be investigated. And while the Taliban previously vowed to allow media outlets to operate, incidents like this have raised major concerns among Afghans. An overnight fire at a COVID-19 field hospital in northwestern Macedonia kills at least 14 people and injures others. Officials say all those who died were likely patients. The cause of the fire is believed to be linked to the facility's oxygen supply. The nation's flags will fly at half-staff for 3 days, while all sports, cultural events, and celebrations are canceled through Saturday. New Zealand artist LORDE is out with a mini album in one of the nation's indigenous languages, Maori. The 24-year-old, who is not fluent in the dialect, re-recorded 5 songs off her new album Solar Power with the help of Maori elders and language experts. The country is currently facing a reckoning with the historical suppression of Maori culture. LORDE says all proceeds from the album will go to charity. Allison, looking forward to hearing that.
Our floor director, Louisa, says it's very good.
Our objective from the beginning here has been to work with the Qataris, work with our partners in the region to get this airport operational and get people who want to depart out of the country.
Kabul's airport back open, the Taliban letting the first large-scale international passenger flight out of Afghanistan since the U.S. withdrawal. About 200 people, including Americans, on that commercial plane, landing safely in Doha, Qatar today. NBC News global correspondent Raf Sanchez is there.
These are the final steps in a long and perilous journey. These passengers, around 113 in total, including Americans, finally stepping onto the runway here in Doha. Their day began in Taliban-controlled Kabul. They passed through Taliban checkpoints, through a Taliban-controlled airport that is threatened by ISIS Khorasan. On to this Qatari Airways Boeing 777, carry them to safety. This is the product of an unprecedented cooperation, coordination between the U.S. government and the Taliban, with the state of Qatar acting as the intermediaries. Now, everybody on this flight is an international citizen, and the question here is, can this model be replicated? Can those Afghans who hold those SIV visas, who served alongside U.S. forces, will they one day be able to get on a plane like this and fly safely out of Kabul? The Biden administration insists it will continue its diplomacy to make sure the Taliban stands by its commitment to let those people go. That is the work of many, many weeks to come. But for now, this is a very happy moment for those people lucky enough to get on the plane through the airport
3 Marines, 10 deployments, 1 family. NBC News senior Washington correspondent Hallie Jackson spoke to a military father and his 2 sons about how 9/11 forever changed their lives.
Hey there, Allison. It is remarkable when you think about it, right? In the years after 9/11, what we saw, some parents and in some cases their children deploying to the same war. I had the opportunity to sit down and meet with one of those families and get to know them a little bit, the Nicholsons, who reflected on what this upcoming anniversary of 9/11 means to them and to so many families like theirs.
Military service, a way of life for the Nicholsons. Years of moving from one base to another, supporting their dad's career in the Marines. But on 9/11, everything changed.
Feels like yesterday.
It does.
And it really does. It's still fresh.
Lieutenant General Lawrence Nicholson, now retired, was on a training mission in the California desert when a car pulled up with news of 2 planes crashing into the World Trade Center.
I think all of us fundamentally knew at that point that our world had changed forever, for everyone in uniform, and many that would soon be in uniform.
Like his son, Kevin Nicholson, at high school on a military base.
I just remember there was a feeling of when are they going, where are they going, what's going to happen, but it's our parents that are going to do it. I remember being angry that I wasn't old enough to go to do anything about it.
Kevin's brother, Andrew, was beginning his sophomore year at the Citadel, a military college, enrolling for the discipline and the structure, but with no plans to enlist.
I thought I would get out and do something locally. But 9/11 happened and just changed the scope, right? I mean, you mature a lot when you see something like that happen for the first time in your life.
That moment ultimately leading these 3 Marines to 10 deployments in all to Afghanistan and Iraq. During one, Larry seriously hurt in a rocket attack in Fallujah. Kevin was a freshman in college when he heard a knock at the door from the school president.
He was in his dress uniform, and I didn't know what to expect. But that's where he told me he had some bad news, and then told me that he was in Germany, which when he told me that, I knew he was alive.
That's emotional for me to even hear.
No question.
Larry was back in combat by Christmas Eve. Over the next decade, he'd command 5,000 Marines in Iraq and 19,000 in Afghanistan, getting the chance to see both his sons in action.
Of all the commanders that are out there, it ends up being your dad.
Yeah.
What are the chances of that happening?
Slim. At the time, I didn't realize how neat it was that we could do that together.
For Mom, Debbie, a different kind of service.
Was it different for you having your husband serve in the military versus having your sons serve in the military?
It's a lot harder on a mother. When your child is learning to walk and they fall, you're there to grab them. But you can't do that when they're at war. You have to just pray and know that they're doing what they want to do.
I don't think we're special in any way. I think we're reflective of so many other military families that are out there.
We all spoke just before the fall of Kabul and the Taliban takeover. Larry later sharing this letter he wrote to his former colleagues when that happened. "Nothing can diminish your selfless service to our nation," he wrote, "the accomplishments you achieved and the spirit with which you fought." The loss of those 13 service members in the airport attack last month, many of them just babies on 9/11, a stinging reminder of the sacrifices so many families make.
I don't think there's a day goes by that probably any of us don't think about former teammates, teammates that didn't come home. I don't think you can go through that without sort of a constant reflection of the incredible young men and women that you serve with and how proud you are to be associated with so many of those folks.
As I mentioned in that story, Allison, we talked really just days before the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, and General Nicholson told us later that that was hard to watch, that he and his sons were in disbelief, but that he wanted to send that letter you saw so that his former teammates knew that what they did mattered, that their efforts were not for nothing. He also said that Saturday's anniversary of 9/11 coming up is a moment to honor the loss of life on that day and the service and heroism of so many Americans in the 20 years since.
What comes next? U.S. officials are still asking that question 20 years after 9/11 as the Taliban takes over Afghanistan again. Will this new regime become another safe haven for terrorists? NBC News Chief Foreign Affairs Correspondent Andrew Mitchell takes a look.
A final welcome home in Cleveland for Navy Corpsman Max Soviak.
And in St. Louis, crowds for U.S. Marine Corporal Jared Schmitz, 2 of the 13 service members killed in the Kabul suicide bombing. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, the Taliban's new all-male government takes over, with holdovers from the regime that harbored Osama bin Laden and wanted terrorists from the brutal Haqqani network linked to al-Qaeda. This following Taliban assaults against women protesters again.
The events of the last few days indicate that we are dealing very much with the same old Taliban.
What does that do to the president's rationale for withdrawing our U.S. troops?
The mission of trying to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a safe haven for terrorism has failed.
At Ramstein, Secretary of State Blinken saying the U.S. relationship with the Taliban will depend on their actions. But he was challenged by an Afghan journalist.
Journalists are beaten. Women protesters on the streets are beaten. What else do you want to see? Planning for another 9/11?
We will see by its actions whether it corrects course.
Michael Leiter directed the National Counterterrorism Center under Presidents Bush and Obama.
We accomplished a lot of our counterterrorism mission, and we largely kept the American people safe. The question now is, what comes next? And the rise of the Taliban will be a magnet for some.
And there are other growing threats. Russia's aggression, China's militarism, North Korea's nuclear weapons, cyber attacks.
We are living at perhaps a time when we are facing more threats in the world than since the end of World War II.
And then there are the Americans still trapped in Afghanistan, still with no clear path to escape. Andrea Mitchell, NBC News, Washington.
2 more victims of the September 11th terror attacks identified just this week. Medical examiners still working to identify more than 1,100 people who died at the World Trade Center. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk takes us inside their painstaking effort to give those 9/11 families some closure.
With their work, like to separate their emotions from the job. But in this case, the medical examiners in New York City say that it is their personal connection to 9/11 that actually energizes their commitment to identifying these people. Medical examiners are not first responders, but that day, Mark Desire went straight to ground zero.
When the South Tower cracked, and I looked up, you were just under. It was the stone's throw from the building. You were just under that, that initial debris. You could see the steel and the concrete and the fire, and it was like, I'm dead.
His team barely survived. It was the start of one of the most complex forensic challenges in human history. 20 years later, 40% of the victims are still unaccounted for. I think for a lot of people, it's going to be surprising to hear that there are so many people who aren't identified.
Everything that destroys DNA was present at ground zero. So fire, water, sunlight, jet fuel, diesel.
Nearly 22,000 remains were collected in the years that followed.
So some as small as a tic-tac, just a bone fragment that we're able to generate DNA profiles from. But every year we make hundreds of identifications of these remains.
And while some families got the call, others, like the Stacks, did not.
I'm waiting for that phone call. Waiting, hey, we identified a piece, but it never happens.
Larry Stack was a firefighter, 32 years on the job.
He rose up to the rank of battalion chief and loved every part of his job.
That love transferred to his sons, who are firefighters themselves. In 2001, Larry Stack was considering retirement.
While they were looking at the first tower burning, the plane hit the second one. He put the binoculars down, he looked at his guys and said, I think they're going to need us now.
Stack was helping an injured man when the buildings came down.
It was just typical of the kind of man he was. He would have never left.
They held a funeral in 2016, burying a blood donation Larry made before his death.
It was a sight to see.
Families like the Stacks are at the heart of the medical examiner's work. Do you have personal communication with some of these families yourself?
Absolutely, yeah. This is an investigation that is unlike any other. And this time of year, we are invited down, we meet with the families, and we talk to them about the newest technology, just like our conversation here, what we've been working on, what we've been able to do. So we had to evolve. We had to push the science out of that necessity to make more IDs.
Just this week, they made two: Dorothy Morgan, an insurance broker, and another unidentified victim. The technology has come a long way, especially with extracting DNA from bone. So this looks very different than it did in 2001.
Yes. Yeah, there's no mortar and pestle here.
Using fake samples, the lab showed us the process.
Being able to grind into that fine powder allows the chemicals to better act on to those, cells to extract the DNA.
And now, Desire says, new, more sensitive technology will give them an even better chance of making an ID.
I'm very appreciative of the work that they're doing.
These people trying to identify everybody, I think they're, no one's ever going to forget.
Your office has described it as a sacred obligation.
We made a commitment 20 years ago to identify everyone, and that commitment is as strong today as it was 20 years ago.
His ripped jacket from 9/11 hangs in the lab. A reminder, there's still work to be done. The medical examiner's office tells me that there are some families who don't want to be notified if their loved ones are identified. And, really this speaks to how people grieve differently. While on the one hand, there may be a family that wants to get that phone call, another may want to just move on and not have to wait for it. Allison?
We're to tune into America Remembers 20 years later, a special News Now report from Ground Zero tomorrow at 12 p.m. Eastern. It is time for The Bottom Line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. Jobless claims hitting another new pandemic low this Thursday. 310,000 Americans filed for first-time unemployment benefits last week. That's the lowest number since March 14th of 2020, and it's even more impressive given the bump in claims from Louisiana last week because of Hurricane Ida. But the markets weren't all that impressed. Check it out. The Dow dropping 151 points to close out the day at 34,879. The S&P 500 NASDAQ also finished the day in the red. She has worked in some of New York's top restaurants for over a decade, but this year, Chef Angie Mar is really making a splash, designing a brand new fine dining experience in Greenwich Village as New York City claws its way out of the pandemic. She is one of many brave women fighting to bring our economy back better than ever. I caught up with Angie in one of the velvet banquettes at Les Trois Chevaux to talk business, veal brains, and braving anti-Asian hate.
The vibe of Les Trois Chevaux, it's very mid-century modern, but Parisian.
Don't tell Angie Mar fine dining in New York City is dead.
I don't think it ever left.
The chef and proprietor of the brand new Les Trois Chevaux in the West Village is betting big on her home city.
I'm always bullish on New York.
And a return to elegant eating.
I wanted a place where people could come, get dressed up, and actually have a very exquisite night out.
Chef Mar made a name for herself, taking over the legendary Beatrice Inn back in 2016. Known for its steaks, smoking cocktails, and basement bar scene, the Bee did a total about-face when the pandemic hit.
We had to stay open to feed our community.
Mar sent out daily emails with takeout and delivery options full of comfort food, filling local bellies and keeping her staff on the payroll.
It's about really taking care of people, and not only people who have dedicated years of their life to working with us, but also the people who live in this neighborhood. It's about community.
Every single member of her staff now working in her brand new French restaurant next door, a space she originally planned to reopen as the new Beatrice Inn, until famed chef Jacques Pepin stepped in.
He said, you have to open a place that is completely different and bears your name on it, because he said you have to believe in yourself and that it's the right time in your career, that you need something with your name on it, not something that's been handed down to you.
So Mar ventured into new, more grown-up territory this July, keeping the focus, though, on family.
My last name, Mar, in Chinese means horse. And I have two younger brothers, and when we were children, my father and my uncles nicknamed us the Three Horses.
Three Horses in French, Les Trois Chevaux.
The color on the banquettes, this is actually the color of my father's favorite sweatshirt. And it was really important for us to put in details that really reflected my family. The Tang Dynasty horses, those were prevalent throughout my household, as well as the money trees.
Tributes to her Chinese heritage that also made her a target this past year.
To be at this stage of my career and to, pick up the phone at my restaurant and get, hate calls telling me to go back to China or whatever, to feel unwelcome in the city that I've spent so much of my life and my career in, that's a very disheartening thing.
Yeah. But it takes a lot more than that to sour Mar in her beloved New York City.
I decided that I wanted a place in New York that really showcased New York artisans. I think it's so important, especially right now as we see the city coming back. The chandelier that we are sitting under is actually the original chandelier from the Waldorf Astoria circa 1931.
And let's not forget about the food. A 3-course prix dinner, distinctly French, with subtle nods to New York.
There's nothing more New York than a black and white cookie.
No.
Right?
No,
That's just something that's so classic.
Yep.
So we kind of did a play on that, and our truffles and caviar is a croissant with black and white truffles in it, pistachio, and we're serving it with golden osetra caviar.
Oh my God. The best black and white cookie you've ever had.
The best black and white, yeah.
There's pheasant for 2, pigeon, veal brains, and some stunning cocktails.
This place is built for champagne and old Burgundy and martinis.
And reminders everywhere.
It's called Women Gathering.
That it just might be women who bring this city back to life.
I think that women are so strong, and I really feel that women are going to be the ones who bring the economy back, and there's no doubt in my mind.
An economy Mar hopes will still have plenty of room for fine dining.
I hope that when people come to Le Toit Chauveau, that we are giving them that experience, that we are giving them that escape, that for the 2, 3, 4 hours that you're here, that we are transporting you into the world that we've created, and you're really able to lose yourself.
Grab the chips, crack open a cold one. Football season is here. Bucs versus Cowboys, Brady versus Prescott. But as the defending Super Bowl champs open their stadium to a full capacity crowd tonight, the toughest opponent for every team just might be COVID. Today, co-host Craig Melvin looks at how the league is changing its playbook.
The Bucs are in the building ahead of an epic matchup, the Super Bowl champs versus America's team.
Get it right out of the gates. Cowboys, Bucs, I love that choice.
Tom Brady, at 44 years old, facing off against Dallas Cowboys QB Dak Prescott, looking to bounce back after a devastating injury. The Cowboys hoping to rebound after a disappointing 2020 season.
Thursday night game, starting the season off. I wouldn't want it any other way.
We'll be excited, and we're playing against a really good football team.
Brady and the Bucs returning to Tampa. How about that? The scene of their greatest triumph, defeating the defending champion Kansas City Chiefs last season to become the only team to win a Super Bowl in their home stadium. That game played in front of only about 24,000 fans and cardboard cutouts. Tonight, Raymond James Stadium will be packed with a sellout crowd of 67,000 expected.
Thing that we missed the most were our fans.
Brady revealed recently that he battled COVID after the team's Super Bowl victory boat parade, where he memorably celebrated on the water and off. He worries the virus could sideline the season.
We're certainly at more risk this year than we put ourselves in last year. It'd be very disappointing to miss games. You feel like you've done everything right. Hopefully we can just navigate it as best we possibly can. I know every team's dealing with the same stuff.
The NFL says 93% of players are fully vaccinated. The Players Association is now calling for daily testing of players, up from the weekly testing currently required by the league. Last year, the NFL managed to play the whole 17-game season without canceling a single game, although some games were postponed. Tonight, the Bucs raised their championship banner in a pregame ceremony as stars from Rob Gronkowski to the ageless Brady get ready to play host again. The fans are ready to get back and cheer on their teams in person.
Tom Brady's back, right? Come on.
Win or lose, I just hope it's a good game. Go Cowboys.
Now, it's game time. And after a long wait, the teams and their fans are ready for some football.
We're certainly ready for some football, and Albert Breer is here to talk with us about it. He is a senior NFL reporter for Sports Illustrated. Albert, we're all so psyched about the game tonight, just the start of the best time of the year. Tom Brady, though, saying he thinks COVID's going to be more of a factor this year than last. We know Dallas offensive lineman Zach Martin tested positive. He's missing tonight's opener. Do you agree with Brady in a negative way? Could COVID be the 12th man this year?
Well, I can certainly tell you this, Allison. I haven't come across a team that thinks it's easier this year. It's actually more complicated. Last year, it was very, very black and white. Everybody's under the same rules. Everyone, more or less, players and coaches, were locked down. And now you have unvaccinated versus vaccinated, two separate sets of rules. And I think the challenge has, actually gotten a little more difficult in other ways, too. And really, there are three things that the NFL is looking at right now. One, there's community spread. And the fact that these guys are out in the communities more is going to lead to more potential exposure, and so that's a factor. Number two, there's the fact that people aren't reporting symptoms maybe quite the same way as they would have been a year ago. And I think we all pre-COVID had maybe this propensity for working, fighting through things at work and everything else. I think after having been through this for a year, maybe some of that's creeped back in. And then I think there's this the simplest factor here, which is everybody's just letting their guard down a little bit more. So I do think that there's a little bit more concern right now that it's going to be more of a factor than there was a couple of months ago, just because of how the rules set up. Now, of course, there's the fact that, at this point, at least, it looks like what the high vaccination numbers they've had, as the effect it's had on the league, is basically that there's, no hospitalizations, less people getting sick, but as far as the way it could affect the game itself and who's available and who's not, I think that's certainly at a level maybe a little bit higher than it was this time last year.
All right, so let's talk about tonight's game, because we know one thing tonight. The fans are going to be there. It is going to feel like a normal football season for the most part, at least for tonight, right? We haven't run into any issues yet. So what do you think about the game tonight? Tampa defending its title. Who do you like? And any favorites heading into the rest of the season? Who you keeping an eye on to see how they do this year?
Yeah, I mean, I think Tampa is really an interesting case because we haven't seen this very often where all 22 starters are back from a Super Bowl champion. It hasn't happened since the 70s. The Raiders were the last team to do it. And there's always been this perception in football that you have to do something to shake things up, no matter how well you did the year before. There has to be some sort of new element added to your team. The Bucs basically return intact. All 22 starters are back. Their entire coaching staff's back. They're running it back. And so the idea that you can do that, that you can't do that's going to be challenged by the Bucs. And I think there's also the natural question of when's Brady going to show his age? He's 44 years old.
Never, I think, is the answer. The gut just doesn't stop.
Oh, it looks like he's aging in reverse.
It really does.
I don't know what it is, but whatever he's taking, I need to get some because it looks like he's aging in reverse. So yeah, I mean, I think that's going to be a question until he's done playing. Is he going to hit the wall the way so many other players have? At 44 years old, he certainly hasn't shown a lot of signs recently. And on the other side of the field, I think it's equally interesting. The Cowboys come back after a very disappointing 2020 season. They had a ton of injuries last year. Dak Prescott's coming back off of major ankle surgery. Their coach, Mike McCarthy, after a disappointing first year, is going to try to atone. Of course, he had a disappointing end in Green Bay, and it was now been 12 years since he won that championship there. So the Cowboys are always interesting, but they're interesting for different reasons this year, where so many guys who were hurt last year are back on the field now, and the most prominent ones, their quarterbacks. So I think it's a great way to kick off the season, getting a Cowboys team that's always a story with so many intriguing storylines coming into this one. And then, of course, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers trying to run back exactly the team that they had last year. All 22 starters back, the entire coaching staff back. It should be really interesting.
Albert, I got to go, but it's football, and I love talking about it. Anyone else you're really excited about this year? The Steelers, maybe, asking for a friend?
I think, well, if you're a Steelers fan, I would say watch that offensive line. You know, how all of that plays out up front is going to go a long way in determining how far they're going to go. Losing DeCastro, losing Villanueva, losing Pouncey, they've got big shoes to fill up front. But the good news for the Steelers now is they've got their best player locked up in TJ Watt, and he just agreed to a deal that'll make him the highest paid defensive player in the history of the game. So having TJ Watt locked up, having guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick on that side of the ball, I think the defense is going to have to carry them early on as they work through some of those offensive line issues.
Anyone else you're excited about this year that I didn't force you to talk about?
I would, you know what, like I think watching the Packers is going to be really interesting for obvious reasons. And they were the story coming into the summer, and going through everything they went through over the last 7 or 8 months with Aaron Rodgers, and all the stuff about this being the last dance for him and Devontae Adams. I actually think that this is probably as talented a roster as Aaron Rodgers has ever played on. They've been in the championship game 2 years in a row. Matt LaFleur's record through 2 years is incredible as head coach there in Green Bay. And I don't know whether or not this is going to be Rodgers' last year in Green Bay. I know there are a lot of people who've already kind of written him his ticket out of town. But I certainly think one way to keep him is to win a championship with him. And it feels to me like this may be the best team he's ever played on. And that to me includes the championship team that he won with in 2010. So the Packers are one team that I think are fascinating going into the year.
All right. So Albert, my producer, said that I can just keep this going because we're having such a good time. So let's keep talking football. I got to ask you about the Patriots. I mean, look, Brady left. It got real weird at the press conference with Belichick about Cam Newton. What is going on with this team, and are you concerned about them this year?
I mean, I look at where they're at, and it's just sort of they'd been in this no man's land last year where they hadn't drafted very well. They had some older players in the team, and I think the question had to be whether or not they were going to reload in a really aggressive way and try to get right back to the level they were, obviously for the 20 years before, or find a way to rebuild and find a way to retool and find a way to get younger. And they went with the former rather than the latter. And so, in spending $160 million in guaranteed money in free agency, something that was completely out of character for New England, I think it's Bill Belichick signaling, I believe that I can win right now. I think that I've got the ability to do it. And, when they spent that money, there was still a big question mark at quarterback. Well, they brought back Cam Newton. They drafted Mac Jones. Mac Jones winds up beating out Cam Newton. And so now I think you get this team and you look at it, it's built to win now. And the age of some of their best players, Stephon Gilmore's in his 30s, Dante Hightower's in his 30s. Again, they spend all that money on all of those free agents. And you don't do that unless you think you're close. And they're entrusting it to a rookie quarterback. And for so long, their advantage, the reason they were playing from ahead to begin every season was because they had the greatest quarterback of all time. And now they're really putting a lot of trust in the hands of a rookie out of Alabama. And so it's going to be interesting to see the way that Mac Jones is able to handle that and navigate that with what's a very veteran group. And of course, I think a coach that most people believe is the greatest of all time.
All right, so I have one more question in about 30 seconds to ask you, so I'll keep it quick. I'm a Steelers fan, so I hate to be excited about the Browns, but those guys have gotten so much better. How do you think they're looking this season in 20 seconds or less?
I like what they've done. Kevin Stefanski, their new head coach, and Andrew Berry, their second-year GM, did a fantastic job in 2020 turning things around. What I can tell you, Allison, there was no circus when I went there this summer, and that's very rare in Cleveland. So I think the quiet was good there, and I believe that they've got maybe the most well-rounded roster in football. Doesn't mean they've got the best roster, but maybe the most well-rounded roster where, you look around and you really don't see any holes. So with the injuries we've seen in Baltimore, I think Cleveland's a good bet to win the AFC North. Bad news for you, though, I guess.
Cleveland, a good bet to win the AFC North. We're going to leave it there, even though I don't like it. Albert, awesome to see you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Allison.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.